What damages the brain faster than dementia? Surprisingly, loneliness. It's not just a feeling, it's a real risk to your health. But there are simple ways to protect yourself. Today, I'm going to share 7 proven tips that help keep your mind sharp, your energy steady, and your spirit lifted, even if you spend a lot of time alone. One of these tips you can try today. One thing I often tell my patients, especially those living alone, is this: don't stop using your voice. Even if no one's around to hear it, say things out loud anyway. As we age, it's not just our bodies that slow down. Parts of our brain can start to get quieter too. And one of the first areas to take the hit is language. That's because when we're not talking regularly, the brain thinks we don't need those pathways anymore, and it begins to let them go. I've seen this happen with many older adults. They start forgetting words, losing the thread of a sentence, or even struggling to say what they're feeling. It doesn't happen all at once. It's subtle at first. You might just stop finishing your thoughts out loud. But little by little, that silence on the outside turns into silence on the inside. That's why even when you're alone, talking, yes, to yourself, can be a powerful and practical way to keep your mind active and engaged. I had a patient a few years ago, Mr. Walter, who was 74 at the time and living on his own just outside of Dayton, Ohio. Widowed for about 6 years, his kids lived out of state, and he didn't get many visitors. When he first came to see me, he said he felt like he was fading, which wasn't something I heard every day. When I asked what he meant, he said he had trouble remembering the names of things, not just complicated ones, but basic stuff, like doorknob or toaster. What struck me most was when he said, "I can go an entire day without hearing a single human voice, not even mine." That stuck with me. I asked him when he last spoke out loud. He thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe when I left a voicemail for my doctor 2 weeks ago." That was it. So we made a simple plan. Every day he would read something out loud. The paper, a cereal box, a few verses from a book of Psalms he kept by the bed. The goal wasn't to perform, just to use his voice daily. 3 weeks. Later, he told me he felt sharper, less foggy. He joked, "I think my cat's sick of my stories, but I feel like I know myself better again." And he wasn't the only one. I've worked with a retired teacher from Milwaukee who reads old letters aloud each morning, and a former mechanic from Tucson who talks himself through breakfast every day, narrating his routine like it's a cooking show. In each case, the outcome is the same: more clarity, more energy, more confidence. What helps most in these situations is not a fancy therapy. It's routine, simple speech. One of the easiest things you can do is start narrating your day. When you get up, say, "Okay, time to open the curtains." When you're making coffee, talk through it. Water's boiling, let's get the mug ready. If you prefer, you can read aloud from a newspaper or a book. And if reading is tough on the eyes, say a prayer or hum your favorite hymn with the words spoken softly. You don't have to make it complicated. The point is to hear yourself, to give your brain a reason to keep those language muscles working. Just 5 to 10 minutes a day can be enough to create real change. Your voice is not just for other people, it's for you. Think of it like stretching your mind every morning. And no, it's not silly, and you're not talking to yourself like a crazy person. You're keeping your brain warm and awake. Even if your words echo back in an empty room, they remind you, you are still here and you still matter. So don't be afraid of the silence. Fill it with something that belongs to you. You are worth hearing. The second thing I always suggest, and I say this gently, is to reach out to someone you haven't spoken to in a while. I know that can feel uncomfortable, even a little embarrassing, especially if it's been months or years. But isolation doesn't just make you lonely. It can actually hurt your brain. Studies have shown that regular social connection keeps your cognitive function stronger as you age. And it's not just about long conversations or deep relationships. Even short, friendly contact can light up areas of the brain tied to memory, attention, and emotion. When we stop reaching out, we often tell ourselves that people are too busy or wouldn't want to hear from us, but more often than not, they're just waiting for a reason to reconnect. And someone has to go first. One woman I worked with, Dolores, was 81 years old and lived in Kansas City. She was a very thoughtful person, the kind who writes thank you cards and never forgets birthdays, but she hadn't spoken to her granddaughter in over a year. She told me she didn't want to interrupt her life or seem needy. Dolores said, if she wanted to talk, she'd call me. I asked her, have you ever thought she might be waiting for you to call first? That stayed with her. The next week, she typed a short text. Hi, sweetheart, I was thinking of you today. How are you doing? Within minutes, her granddaughter replied, Grandma, I miss you so much. Can we talk soon? They set up a weekly phone call after that. Another client, George, 76, from Tucson, had been friends with a guy from the Navy. They used to fish together every summer, but hadn't spoken in over a decade. George looked him up, called the number, and said, Hey, it's been a while. Turns out the guy had lost his wife and thought he was the one who'd been forgotten. Now they talk every other Sunday. All it took was one message, one call, one moment of courage. What I usually tell people is this: pick just one person. Look through your phone, your old address book, or even your Christmas card list. Find a name that makes you smile, someone who once mattered to you, and just send a simple message. Hi, I was thinking about you today. Or, how are you? I'd love to catch up. You don't have to explain why it's been so long, and you don't need a perfect reason. The connection is the reason. You don't need to fix the past or start a big conversation. Sometimes all it takes is one little spark to remind you that you're still connected. You matter to people, even if they don't say it often. And someone out there may be feeling exactly like you, just waiting for that tiny sign that they haven't been forgotten. The third thing I always bring up, and I usually say it with a smile, is this: leave the house every day, even if it's just to buy something you don't actually need. I know that might sound silly at first, but I've seen it work more times than I can count. As we get older, especially when we live alone or don't have a regular routine, the days can start to blend together. The less we move, the less we want to move. And it's not just a physical thing. Our brains actually start to slow down too. The lack of outside stimulation, the quiet, the sameness, it doesn't just affect our mood, it impacts our memory, our balance, even our immune system. I often tell people, your brain needs new input the way your body needs fresh air. And sometimes, something as simple as going to the corner store for an apple can make all the difference. One of my clients, Gerald, was 69 and had lost his wife the year before. He lived in a quiet part of Spokane and said the hardest part wasn't the grief, it was the silence. He said, it's like every day just disappears. When we talked about how often he left the house, he admitted it wasn't much. Maybe once a week to pick up groceries, but only if he had to. So I suggested something small. Go out every day, even if it's for something you already have. I told him it didn't matter if he needed the thing. What mattered was the action. He tried it. The first day, he walked to a gas station and bought a banana. The next day, a roll of paper towels. Then, a small bottle of milk. After a week, he said, I've started recognizing people again. The cashier waves now. There's a guy who walks his dog at the same time every morning. These little interactions gave structure to his day, and more than that, they reminded him that he was still a part of the world. Another woman I worked with, Evelyn, 72, from Atlanta, started going to the same bakery every morning, even though she didn't like sweets. She'd buy a tea, sit by the window, and nod to the same 3 people who came in. She said it made her feel tethered to something. What often helps is giving yourself a reason to move, even if that reason is small. You don't need a shopping list, just a doorway. Put on your shoes, walk to the mailbox, Stop at the corner shop for a newspaper or a snack. Even 10 minutes of walking or seeing a familiar face can shift your whole day. It doesn't have to be meaningful to be valuable. It just has to be regular. Some people think staying inside is easier, and maybe it is, but it's also heavier. Movement doesn't just keep your body working, it reminds your spirit that the world is still out there, waiting for you to show up. You don't have to do something big to feel alive. Sometimes just buying an apple can be an act of hope. Another suggestion I like to share, and this one is close to my heart, is to make a habit of sharing your memories. I've worked with older adults for over 30 years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that your stories are more powerful than you think. When you don't talk about your past, it can feel like those moments start to fade, and it's not just emotional, it's biological. The parts of your brain that store and organize memories stay healthier when they're activated through storytelling. Speaking about your past helps you hold on to your identity and even strengthens connections between brain cells, which is especially important as we age. But I also know how many of you don't feel like anyone's interested in your stories, or worse, that you've already told them too many times. Let me tell you, no one else lived your life the way you did, and that makes it worth telling again. One woman I think of often is Loretta. She was 76 when we met, retired from teaching and living in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She told me, "I feel like I'm disappearing." She said her days were quiet, her phone rarely rang, and even when her family visited, she didn't feel like there was space for her voice. So she started writing her memories down in a notebook. Not for anyone else, just to remember. It helped a little, but then something unexpected happened. Her granddaughter, Rachel, 17, came over one afternoon, found the notebook on the table, and started reading it. She didn't say much that day, just asked if she could borrow it. The next week, Rachel came back with questions. "Grandma, what was it like to ride the train to Chicago in the 60s? Did you really go dancing with someone named Marvin?" That was the start of something. They began meeting every Saturday to talk and write. Loretta said, "For the first time in years, I felt useful. And I had another client, Carl, a widower from Oregon, who started recording short voice memos on his phone. Just 2 minutes a day, stories about his childhood, his first job, his favorite meal." He said it helped him feel like he was still in the story, not just looking back on it. What often helps is to find one small way to bring a memory out into the light. You can write a paragraph, tell a story over the phone, or even speak it aloud just to yourself. The format doesn't matter. What matters is that your voice carries your history, and every time you share, you're saying, "This happened. I was here, and it mattered." Memories are not just reflections, they're anchors. They keep you steady in the present and help others understand where they come from too. You don't need permission to tell your story. You've earned it. Even if it's just one small memory a day, that's how you stay present, by remembering out loud. One suggestion that tends to surprise people, but often makes the biggest difference, is to build yourself a small morning ritual, something just for you. When you live alone or you're no longer tied to a work schedule, the hours of the day can start to blur, and without a sense of rhythm, both your mind and your mood can start to drift. I've seen this again and again with older adults. When there's no structure, anxiety tends to creep in, and it's not always loud. Sometimes it's just a dull heaviness or a restless feeling that shows up for no clear reason. You might start waking up too early, or sleeping too much, or feeling like time moves strangely. That's not just a feeling. It's your brain looking for a pattern to hold on to. And one of the simplest ways to give it that is to create a gentle routine you can return to each day, something that says, "This is the start." I remember working with a man named Ronald, 78 years old, who had recently moved into an assisted living facility in Ohio after breaking his hip. He used to work in carpentry, always on the move, but now most of his days felt quiet and shapeless. When I asked how his mornings were going, he shrugged and said, "I don't even know what I do anymore. I just wait for the next thing to happen. So we tried something new. I asked him what breakfast used to look like when life felt full. He said, toast, strawberry jam, and the news on the radio, always around 9. That gave us a place to start. He made a decision. Every morning at 9, he would set the table with care. 1 plate, 1 napkin, the same jam, the same station. No distractions, just that. After a few days, he said he started looking forward to it. After 2 weeks, he told me, "It feels like I'm meeting myself again." Another client, Deborah, 73, from Michigan, sets her alarm for 8:30, plays one gospel song, then has a cup of tea by the window with a notepad nearby. Sometimes she writes, sometimes she doesn't. But she told me, "At least I know where my morning begins." What often helps is not a big schedule or a long list. It's one repeated moment that gently marks the beginning of your day. You might light a candle, listen to one song, make the same cup of tea, or read a favorite quote aloud. What matters is the consistency. When your brain senses that familiar cue, it settles. It knows where it is again. A steady morning ritual is like a quiet handshake with the day. It doesn't need to be perfect or impressive. It just needs to be yours. That moment of routine, however small, becomes your anchor, and when you start the day grounded, the rest of it doesn't feel so unpredictable. And one more thing I always bring up, especially with older clients who feel disconnected, is this: join something, even if it's online. I understand that the idea of using a computer or smartphone can be frustrating or even intimidating, especially if it's not something you grew up with. But the truth is, we all need to feel like we belong somewhere. That feeling of being seen, heard, included is not a luxury. It's a psychological need, right up there with sleep and nutrition. When we lose that sense of belonging, especially later in life, our brains can start to shut down emotionally and cognitively. I've seen people bounce back from depression and even memory problems just by finding a group, any group, that gives them a place to show up and be themselves. I remember a woman named Helen, 80 years old, living in St. Louis. She told me during one of our early visits, "Oh, don't even mention the internet. That stuff's not for me." She'd lost her husband a few years earlier, and most of her friends had either moved away or passed on. Her days were quiet, and she said, "I feel like I live in a bubble." I asked her if she had any hobbies she missed, and she said, "Roses. My mother used to grow the most beautiful antique roses." That gave me an idea. With the help of her neighbor, we found an online group for rose gardening, mostly older women, sharing photos, tips, and stories. Helen didn't post anything at first, she just listened. Then one day, a woman from North Carolina shared a photo of a yellow climbing rose, the exact same kind Helen's mother used to grow. Helen replied with a comment, and they ended up exchanging messages every week. "It's strange," she told me, "how someone you've never met can feel so familiar. And I've seen this happen again and again, whether it's book clubs, prayer groups, quilting circles, or even cooking forums. It doesn't have to be big, it just has to be real. What often helps is starting small. Look for a free group on Facebook, Zoom, or even YouTube comments, one centered around something you enjoy or used to enjoy. Gardening, old movies, Bible. Study, knitting. There are communities for every interest, and most are welcoming to newcomers. You don't have to say anything right away. Just being there, hearing others, reading a few words, it can be enough to spark something inside. There are people out there right now, feeling exactly like you. They're looking for connection too. And even through a screen, that connection can be real. You don't have to be good with technology. You just have to be willing to try. Sometimes, just joining the room is the first step back into the world. Another thing I often suggest, especially for those living alone, is to gently shape the silence in your home. Not fight it, but give it a rhythm. Many people don't realize how loud silence can be until they're surrounded by it. When everything goes quiet, especially early in the morning or just before bed, that stillness can feel heavy, almost like a weight on your chest. For older adults, especially after the loss of a spouse or a big change in routine, that silence often fills up with worry, with what-ifs, with memories that don't always feel comforting. The brain, when left unstimulated, tends to drift into anxiety. But sound, even soft, predictable sound, can act like a guide, giving your mind something to hold on to. I think of Joe, one of my longtime clients. He's 75, and after his wife passed away, mornings became the hardest part of his day. He told me, "It's not the waking up, it's what I wake up to." He described it as a kind of emptiness that echoed. No footsteps, no coffee brewing, just space. His neighbor, a retired nurse, suggested something simple. Turn on the radio every morning at 8 a.m. Same station, same volume, same time. At first, Joe wasn't sure it would help. But after a few days, he started to notice something. That soft background voice, that familiar jingle between segments. It didn't erase the silence, but it made it feel less cold. Eventually, he added his own touch. He'd sit with his coffee, write a few lines in a notebook, and just be with the morning. Now it's quiet, he told me, but it's not empty anymore. Another woman I worked with, Sarah, 79, from Arizona, plays a short playlist every night before bed. Same 3 songs, always in the same order. It became her way to tell her brain, "We're winding down now." What often helps is creating a sound cue, something simple and familiar. You could turn on a talk radio show while you make breakfast, play a favorite album during tea time, or read a poem aloud each evening. It doesn't have to fill the room, just anchor it. When the mind has something steady to expect, it starts to relax into the moment. Silence isn't always the enemy. But unstructured silence, that kind that sneaks in and makes you feel alone, can be hard to carry. When you shape it gently, with little rituals and quiet sound, it becomes something else entirely. A background, a rhythm, a sign that the day belongs to you. If even one of these tips felt helpful to you, share it in the comments. Your words might help someone else feel a little less alone. Subscribe if you'd like more videos like this, warm, simple, and made just for you. And remember, you are not alone. You matter, and life is still holding your hand. All you have to do is reach back.